I was sitting in my downtown Seattle apartment reviewing code for my latest project when my phone buzzed. The message from my father cut through me like a blade. "You're selfish and dead to me. Don't contact us again." My hands trembled as I read those words. But what hurt most wasn't the cruelty. It was that this came after I'd simply said no to lending my brother Jake another $20,000 for what he claimed were urgent business debts. 6 years of quietly paying for everything. 6 years of being the invisible financial backbone holding my family together. 6 years of watching Jake take credit for my generosity while demanding more. I typed back a single word, "Okay." Then I picked up my phone and dialed my bank. "First National Bank, this is Amanda. How can I help you today? I need to cancel all automatic transfers from my accounts to any Weston family accounts effective immediately." I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Amanda paused. "Mr. Weston, are you certain I see substantial monthly transfers here? Your parents' mortgage payment of $2,800 educational payments to Seattle University for $3,200, medical facility payments for $1,700, and several other recurring transfers totaling just over $8,000 monthly. $8,000 every month for 6 years. Nearly $600,000 of my life's work flowing silently to keep my family afloat while they believed Jake was their savior. Cancel them all, I confirmed. As Amanda processed the cancellations, memories flooded back. When my tech startup sold for $12 million 3 years ago, I'd been quietly ecstatic. Finally, I could help my family properly. Dad had lost his factory job. Mom struggled with medical bills from her diabetes, and my sister Sarah dreamed of finishing college. My grandmother Dorothy, 84 and proud, had been living in increasingly difficult circumstances. But I'd made a crucial error. Instead of being open about my success, I'd set up anonymous transfers and fake business accounts, thinking it would preserve everyone's pride. I'd even created fake paperwork showing the money came from Jake's supposed import-export business. Jake had been struggling with gambling addiction for years in and out of rehab, and I'd wanted to give him something positive to tell the family. What I hadn't anticipated was how Jake would exploit my generosity. 3 hours after canceling the transfers, I drove to my storage unit across town. Inside a fireproof safe, I kept copies of every financial transaction I'd ever made for my family. Bank statements, transfer records, fake business documents I'd created to hide my involvement. As I spread the papers across my kitchen table, a sickening pattern emerged. According to these records, I'd been paying for Mom and Dad's mortgage since Dad lost his job. I'd covered Sarah's entire college tuition and living expenses. I'd been funding what I believed were payments to Sunset Manor Assisted Living for grandmother Dorothy's care. I'd even been covering Jake's supposed rehab center costs at Pacific Recovery Institute. But as I cross-referenced these payments with actual bank records, discrepancies appeared. The rehab payments didn't match any legitimate facility's billing structure. The assisted living payments were going to an account that wasn't affiliated with any senior care facility I could identify. I grabbed my laptop and started digging deeper. Within 2 hours, I'd uncovered a financial maze that made my stomach turn. The rehab payments were going to an account registered to something called Pacific Holdings LLC. When I searched that company, I found it listed Jake Weston as the sole proprietor. The business address, a luxury apartment complex in Bellevue. The assisted living payments were even more disturbing. They were being deposited into an account belonging to Dorothy Care Services, another LLC registered to Jake. But when I called Sunset Manor directly, they had no record of Dorothy Weston ever being a resident. My hands shook as I picked up my old iPhone, the one I'd stopped using 2 years ago but kept for backup. I scrolled through old text messages, looking for communication between Jake and our parents. What I found made me physically ill. Jake to Mom, "Eddie's being really stingy lately. He keeps questioning my business expenses. I think he's jealous that I'm finally successful. Jake to Dad. I hate to say this, but Eddie called me greedy yesterday when I asked for help with Dorothy's care costs. Sometimes I wonder if money changed him. Jake to Sarah. Don't mention Eddie's attitude to Mom and Dad. They're already stressed about Dorothy. But honestly, I'm carrying this whole family financially, and Eddie acts like he deserves credit just because he has some tech job. The messages painted me as selfish and ungrateful, while Jake positioned himself as the family's selfless provider. Every cent I'd contributed was being credited to Jake, while he simultaneously borrowed money from our parents for supposed emergencies. Emergencies I now suspected were connected to his gambling addiction. My phone rang. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. Eddie, what the hell did you do? Her voice was sharp, accusatory. Mom just called me crying. Apparently, Seattle U called saying my tuition payments stopped, and she's freaking out because their mortgage payment got rejected. Sarah, I need to explain something to you. You need to fix this is what you need to do. I have 1 semester left before graduation, and Jake's been helping me this whole time. Now you're going to sabotage that because you had some fight with Dad. The irony burned. Jake had been helping her with money I'd been providing while I was viewed as the problem. Meet me for coffee tomorrow morning, I said. There are things you need to know. I don't have time for coffee. I have finals next week, and now I'm worried I won't even be enrolled by then. She hung up, leaving me staring at a pile of financial records that told the story of a deception so elaborate, so carefully constructed, that my own family saw me as the villain in their financial rescue story. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Dorothy. If Jake wasn't actually paying for her assisted living care, where was she? I'd been sending $1,700 monthly for 2 years believing she was receiving quality care at a nice facility. The thought of my grandmother, who'd helped raise me after my parents divorced and remarried each other, living somewhere unsafe or uncomfortable, made me sick. At 6 in the morning, I called every senior living facility in the greater Seattle area. None had any record of Dorothy Weston. Finally, I called the last number I had for her, a landline I hadn't used in 3 years, because Jake always said he'd handle communication with her since she got confused easily on the phone. An elderly voice answered after 8 rings. Hello? Grandmother, it's Eddie. Silence. Then quietly, Eddie, my Eddie. Oh, honey, I thought you'd forgotten about me. My heart broke. Grandmother, where are you living? Oh, I'm in this little place Jake found for me. It's not much, but he says it's what the family can afford right now. I understand everyone's struggling. What's the address? She gave me an address in South Seattle in a neighborhood I knew wasn't safe. As I drove there that morning, I realized I was about to discover just how deep Jake's deception went, and how much damage my attempt to secretly help my family had actually caused. The address led me to a rundown studio apartment complex, where the elevator was broken and half the hallway lights were out. I climbed 4 flights of stairs, my anger building with each step. When Dorothy opened the door, I barely recognized the woman who'd once been the strongest person I knew. She'd lost at least 30 pounds. Her apartment was barely 300 square feet, furnished with what looked like thrift store furniture and a hot plate instead of a proper stove. But her face lit up when she saw me, and she hugged me like I'd returned from war. Jake said you were too busy with your new job to visit, she said, offering me instant coffee. He said you felt bad about not being able to help with my care expenses, but that you were doing your best. I wanted to tell her everything right then, but I needed proof before I destroyed her image of Jake. Instead, I spent 3 hours with her, learning that she'd been living here for 2 years, believing the family was struggling financially, and this was the best they could afford for her care. She'd been eating mostly canned soup and crackers, afraid to ask for more help, because Jake had told her everyone was stretched thin. When I left, I drove straight to the offices of Marcus Chen, a private investigator I'd worked with during my startup's due diligence process. I handed him Jake's information and asked for a complete background check. I need to know where he lives, what he's been doing for work, and where every dollar has been going, I said. My family's been manipulated and I need proof before I confront anyone. Marcus promised results within 48 hours. While I waited, I decided to verify Jake's supposed business. According to the documents I'd seen, Jake ran an import-export company called Pacific Global Enterprises. I'd even helped him create fake invoices and contracts to show our parents when they asked about his success. But when I searched business registrations, no such company existed. Pacific Holdings LLC, the account receiving my rehab payments, was registered to Jake's name with an address I didn't recognize. I drove to that address and found myself outside the Meridian Luxury Apartments in Bellevue, a complex where one-bedroom units started at $4,000 monthly. I waited in my car for 3 hours before I saw Jake emerge from the building's parking garage, driving a brand new BMW I'd never seen before. But he wasn't alone. A blonde woman in her 20s was with him, laughing at something he'd said. They looked like a couple. This was interesting considering Jake had told our parents he was too focused on business and recovery to date anyone. I followed them to an upscale restaurant in downtown Bellevue where they met another couple for what appeared to be a double date. Through the window, I watched Jake pay the bill with a credit card, looking relaxed and happy. Marcus called the next morning. "Eddie, you need to sit down for this." His voice was grim. "Your brother has no legitimate source of income, no registered business, no employment records for the past 3 years, but he's living in a $2,000 apartment and spending money like he's wealthy. What about the rehab? There's no Pacific Recovery Institute at the address on those bills. That address is a fake." But here's where it gets worse. Jake's been gambling at underground poker games in 3 different locations around Seattle. High-stakes games. According to my sources, he's won some big hands, but he's lost even more. Marcus paused. "Eddie, I found evidence that he owes money to some very dangerous people. Loan sharks who don't mess around. And there's more." "Tell me." "He's been using multiple credit cards registered under various family members' names. Identity theft, essentially. But the worst part is what I found about your grandmother's situation." My stomach dropped. "Jake's been collecting $1,700 monthly from you for her care, but she's been paying her own rent on that studio apartment from her Social Security. Jake convinced her to sign over power of attorney 2 years ago, claiming it was for family financial planning. He's been taking her Social Security payments above her basic living expenses and using them for gambling." I sat in silence, processing the magnitude of Jake's betrayal. "There's one more thing," Marcus continued. "Jake owes $75,000 to a loan shark operation run by someone called Tony Marcelli. According to my sources, Marcelli's been getting impatient. They're threatening to collect from Jake's family if he doesn't pay soon." "What does that mean?" "It means they might go after your parents' house, Eddie. If Jake used any family property as collateral without their knowledge, your parents could be in physical danger." I thanked Marcus and hung up my mind, reeling. Everything I'd done to help my family had been twisted into a weapon against them. Jake had turned my financial support into his personal gambling fund while positioning himself as their savior and me as their selfish, successful son who refused to help. But the loan shark situation changed everything. My family wasn't just being lied to, they were in actual danger. I spent the rest of that day putting together a comprehensive file of evidence. Bank records showing my payments, Marcus's investigation results, photos of Jake's luxury apartment and expensive car, documentation proving the fake businesses. Everything needed to reveal the truth to my family. Then I drove to my parents' house for the first time in 6 months. Dad answered the door, his face hardening when he saw me. "I thought I made myself clear." "Dad, I have information about Jake that you need to see. Information about where your mortgage payments have really been coming from and about the danger your family might be in." He started to close the door, but something in my voice stopped him. "5 minutes," he said. "Then I want you gone." I spread the documents across their kitchen table, the same table where we'd shared thousands of family dinners. As I explained each piece of evidence, I watched my parents' faces change from skepticism to confusion to horror. "This is impossible," Mom whispered, staring at bank records showing payments from my accounts to theirs. "Jake showed us his business contracts. He showed us the money coming in." "Those contracts were fake, Mom. I helped him create them because I wanted you to have financial help without your pride being hurt. But I never intended for him to take credit and manipulate all of you." Dad picked up photos of Jake's apartment. He told us he was living in a small place near his work. Said he was keeping expenses low to help the family more. "He's been living in luxury while telling you I was selfish for not helping more. And there's something else you need to know about the loan sharks." I explained the $75,000 debt, the threats against family members, and the possibility that their house had been put up as collateral without their knowledge. Mom started crying. Dad sat in stunned silence. Then the front door opened and Jake walked in. "Hey, Mom, Dad, I brought dinner from that place you like." He stopped when he saw me, and the paper spread across the table. His confident smile faltered for just a moment before returning. "What's going on here?" Dad looked at Jake with an expression I'd never seen before. "Son, we need to talk." But Jake was already moving toward me, his face flushed with anger. "Eddie, what are you doing here? What lies are you telling them now?" "They're not lies, Jake, and you know it." Jake's eyes scanned the documents on the table, and I saw the moment he realized his deception was over. But instead of confession or remorse, his expression hardened into something almost dangerous. "You always had to be the hero, didn't you?" he said. "You couldn't just let me have this one thing." That's when I realized Jake had never intended to pay me back, never felt guilty about the lies, and never cared about the damage he was causing to our family. He'd simply found a system that worked for him, and my confrontation was just an inconvenience to be managed. What I didn't know was that Jake had been preparing for this possibility for months, and the conversation was about to take a turn that would put everyone in immediate danger. What one thing Jake, Dad's voice was barely controlled. "What one thing are you talking about?" Jake looked around the room calculating. I could see him weighing his options, deciding whether to continue lying or try a different approach. He chose manipulation. "Look, maybe I should have been more honest about Eddie's contributions," he said, his voice taking on the wounded tone I'd heard him use countless times when caught in smaller lies. "But Eddie doesn't understand what it's like to be the failure of the family. He's always been successful, always had money. I just wanted to feel useful for once." "By stealing from grandmother Dorothy," I said. "By putting their house at risk with loan sharks." Jake's face went pale. "You don't know what you're talking about." $75,000, Jake. That's what you owe Tony Marcelli's operation. And according to my investigator, you've been using family information as collateral." Mom gasped. "Jake, tell me he's lying." Before Jake could answer, there was a loud knock at the front door. Not a polite knock, the kind that makes everyone in the house freeze. Dad went to the window and peered through the blinds. "There are 3 men outside," he said quietly. "Big men. They don't look friendly." Jake's face went white. "Don't answer it." The knocking continued, getting more insistent. Then a voice called out, "Jake Weston, we know you're in there. Time to settle up." Dad looked at Jake with pure horror. "What have you done?" "It's not supposed to happen like this," Jake said, backing toward the kitchen. "I had more time. I was going to figure it out." The knocking stopped. For a moment, we all stood in terrified silence. Then we heard voices around the side of the house and the sound of the back door handle being tested. "Call 911. I told Mom, but Jake grabbed the phone from her hand. "No police," he said desperately. "These aren't the kind of people who disappear when cops show up. They'll just come back later and they'll be angrier." "Then what do you suggest?" Dad's voice was shaking. Before Jake could answer, my phone rang. Unknown number. "Answer it," Jake said. "It's probably them." I answered. A gravelly voice said, "You must be the brother with money. We need to talk." "Who is this?" "Someone who's tired of waiting for your worthless brother to pay what he owes." "You can settle this right now." or things get complicated for your whole family. I looked around the room at my terrified parents, at Jake, who was practically trembling at the evidence of years of manipulation spread across the kitchen table. Everything clicked into place. "Put me on speaker," I told the caller. "Eddie, don't," Jake pleaded. I put the phone on speaker. "This is Eddie Weston. You're calling about money my brother owes you. $75,000 plus interest, plus fees for having to come here tonight. Let's call it $90,000 even." Dad made a choking sound. Mom grabbed his arm. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "You're going to leave this property immediately. You're going to give me 24 hours to verify the exact amount owed and the terms. Then we'll discuss payment. You don't make demands with us, kid." "I'm not making demands. I'm offering a business solution. You want your money, I have money. But we do this legally and properly, or you don't get a cent and you deal with FBI Financial Crimes Unit instead." There was a pause, then 24 hours. "But if you're playing games," "No games, but no more visits to this house either. My parents had nothing to do with this debt." After I hung up, the room was silent except for Dad's labored breathing. "How did you know to say that?" Mom asked. "Because I've dealt with business negotiations before. They want money, not violence. Violence is bad for business." Jake slumped into a chair. "Eddie, I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far." "How far exactly? What else haven't you told us?" Jake looked up with tears in his eyes. "I forged some documents for the loans. I may have used Dad's signature." Dad's face went red. "What documents?" "Loan applications. I told them Dad was co-signing. And I may have used the house as collateral." Mom screamed. Actually screamed, a sound of pure anguish that I'd never heard from her before. Dad grabbed his chest, and for a moment I thought he was having a heart attack. "Dad, are you okay?" He was breathing heavily, his face gray. "My chest, it's tight." "We're going to the hospital," I said. "Now." "Eddie, wait," Jake said. "We need to talk about how to handle this, as a family." I turned to look at my brother, really look at him, and for the first time I saw him clearly. Not as the troubled younger brother I'd been trying to save, not as the gambling addict who needed help, but as a man who had systematically destroyed his family's financial security while positioning himself as their savior, a man who had just put my father in the emergency room. "Jake," I said quietly, "you're going to pack a bag and leave this house tonight. You're going to stay away from Mom and Dad while I figure out how to clean up this mess. And you're going to pray that Dad is okay. You can't kick me out of my parents' house. Watch me." As the paramedics arrived and loaded Dad into the ambulance, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my family had been built on Jake's lies. And now, with Dad possibly having a heart attack and loan sharks threatening my mother, I was going to have to decide whether saving Jake was worth destroying everyone else. The answer for the first time in my life was becoming clear. Dad spent 2 nights in the hospital with what doctors called a cardiac event. Not quite a heart attack, but dangerous enough to require monitoring. While he recovered, I worked around the clock to untangle the financial web Jake had created. The loan shark situation was worse than I'd initially understood. Jake hadn't just borrowed $75,000. He'd forged loan documents using Dad's information, making it appear that Dad was the primary borrower with Jake as a co-signer. Legally, this made Dad responsible for the debt even though he'd never seen the money. I hired Benjamin Torres, an attorney who specialized in financial crimes, to review all the documentation. His assessment was grim. "Your father could face criminal charges if the loan shark operation decides to press fraud charges," Ben explained. "And since the house was used as collateral without his knowledge, he could lose the property even if the criminal charges don't stick." "What about Jake?" "Jake's committed multiple federal crimes: identity theft, elder abuse, regarding your grandmother fraud involving the fake business entities. If you decide to pursue charges, he's looking at serious prison time." When I brought this information to the hospital, Dad listened in silence while Mom cried quietly in the corner chair. "What do you think we should do?" Dad asked when I finished explaining. I think we need to be realistic about who Jake is and what he's done, I said. This isn't a mistake or an addiction problem. This is criminal behavior that's put all of you in danger. Mom looked up, her eyes red from crying. He's still my son. He's also the reason you're sitting in a cardiac unit right now. Eddie, that's not fair. What's not fair, Mom, is that I've been secretly supporting this family for 6 years while Jake took credit and manipulated all of you into thinking I was selfish. What's not fair is that Grandmother Dorothy has been living in poverty while Jake used my money for gambling and luxury apartments. What's not fair is that Dad almost died from stress caused by Jake's lies. Sarah arrived at the hospital that evening. She'd driven from campus after I'd finally reached her with a full explanation of the situation. "This is insane," she said, reading through the evidence I'd compiled. "Jake's been paying for my school this whole time with your money." "Yes." "And he told Mom and Dad that you refused to help with my tuition." "Yes." Sarah sat down hard in a waiting room chair. "I called you selfish. I told my friends that my successful brother was too proud to help with family problems." "Sarah, you didn't know." "But I should have known. I should have questioned why Jake suddenly had money when he'd been struggling for years." When Jake arrived at the hospital that night, he found all 4 of us waiting for him in Dad's room. I'd insisted that this conversation happen with everyone present. "How is he?" Jake asked, looking at Dad in the hospital bed. "Alive," I said. "No thanks to you." "Eddie, can we talk privately?" "No. Everything you want to say, you can say in front of everyone." Jake looked around the room, clearly uncomfortable with the audience. "Look, I know things got out of hand, but I can fix this. I have a plan." "What plan?" Sarah asked. "There's a poker game this weekend, high stakes. If I can just get a stake together, I can win back everything I owe and more." The room fell silent. Even Mom, who'd been defending Jake all week, stared at him in disbelief. "You want to gamble your way out of a gambling debt?" Dad's voice was weak but incredulous. "It's not gambling when you know you can win. I've been watching these players for months. I know their tells, their patterns." "Jake," I said slowly, "do you understand that you've committed multiple felonies? That there are federal agencies that investigate the kind of fraud you've been running? That Mom and Dad could lose their house because of documents you forged? That's why I need to win the money back, to make everything right." "And what if you lose?" Jake hesitated. "I won't lose." "But what if you do?" "Then..." Jake's voice trailed off as he apparently realized the question had no good answer. "Then our parents lose their home, and you go to prison, and Grandmother Dorothy continues living in poverty, while you gamble away any remaining family resources." I finished. "Eddie, you don't understand the pressure I've been under. The pressure of living in a luxury apartment while your grandmother eats canned soup for dinner. That's not... I was going to fix that. When after the next big win after the win after that..." Sarah stood up. "Jake, I need to ask you something and I want you to tell me the truth." "Okay." "Did you ever intend to pay Eddie back for any of the money he gave the family?" Our... Jake looked around the room, clearly calculating his answer. "Of course I did." "That's not what I asked." "Did you ever intend to tell the family that Eddie was the one paying for everything?" It's complicated." "It's yes or no, Jake." Silence. "No," he finally said. "I didn't plan to tell you. Eddie has always been the successful one. I just wanted to feel important for once. By stealing credit for his generosity? By finally being useful to my family." "You weren't useful," Sarah said, her voice hard. "You were harmful. You turned us against the one person who was actually helping us." "Sarah, please." "No, Jake, I'm done. I spent 6 months thinking Eddie was selfish and cruel while you were living off his money and lying to all of us." Mom finally spoke up. "Jake, honey, you need help. Professional help. I need support from my family. You need to face consequences for your actions," I said. "Tomorrow morning, I'm meeting with the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. I'm giving them everything I've found about your activities. Eddie, you can't. I can and I will. He's your brother, Mom pleaded. And you're my parents, and Dorothy is my grandmother, and Sarah is my sister. Jake made a choice to hurt all of you for his own benefit. Now I'm making a choice to protect all of you from further harm. What about the loan sharks? I'll handle the loan sharks. But I won't enable Jake anymore, and I won't watch him destroy this family while pretending to save it. Jake stood up, his face flushed with anger. Fine. You want to be the hero, you handle everything. But don't expect me to thank you for sending me to prison. I don't expect anything from you anymore, Jake. That's the point. After Jake left, the room was quiet for a long time. Finally, Dad spoke. Eddie, are you sure about involving the FBI? Dad Jake committed federal crimes, identity theft, elder abuse fraud. If I don't report it, he'll just find other victims, maybe other family members, maybe innocent people. But he'll go to prison. He earned that outcome. Sarah took my hand. Eddie, I'm sorry. For everything I said, everything I believed about you. You didn't know. But I should have trusted you. You've never lied to us. Actually, I did lie. I lied about where the money was coming from. If I'd been honest from the beginning, maybe none of this would have happened. Dad shifted in his hospital bed. Son, why didn't you tell us about your success, about wanting to help? I thought about that question. Because I was afraid you'd be too proud to accept help. And because I wanted Jake to feel successful instead of like the family failure. So you let us think you were selfish while Jake got credit for your generosity. I thought I was protecting everyone's feelings. And look how that turned out. Mom wiped her eyes. What happens now? Now we rebuild, I said. Honestly this time. No more secrets, no more lies, no more enabling destructive behavior. And Jake, I looked at my parents, at Sarah, at the evidence of Jake's betrayal spread across the hospital room table. Jake makes his own choices now and lives with his own consequences. What I didn't know was that Jake was already making his next choice. And it would prove that everything I'd learned about him so far was just the beginning of his capacity for deception and manipulation. The FBI took Jake into custody 3 days later. Agent Patricia Morgan, who specialized in financial fraud cases, met with me at their Seattle field office to review the evidence I'd compiled. This is one of the most comprehensive cases of family financial fraud I've seen, she told me as we went through the documentation. Multiple identity theft charges, elder abuse, loan fraud, and the fake business entities. Your brother's looking at significant federal prison time. How long? With this much evidence, probably 5 to 7 years minimum. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt exhausted. The loan shark situation resolved more quickly than expected. It turned out that Tony Markelli's operation was already under federal investigation, and my documentation of Jake's forged loan papers gave the FBI additional evidence for their case. The fraudulent debt was voided and my parents' house was released from any claims. But the damage to my family ran deeper than financial fraud. Mom and Dad returned from the hospital to find their mortgage in arrears, their credit damaged by Jake's identity theft, and bills piling up from medical expenses not covered by their insurance. When I offered to help, they refused. We need to stand on our own feet, Dad said when I came to their house with a check to cover their immediate expenses. We've been accepting charity without knowing it for too long. It's not charity, Dad. I'm your son. You're our son who we treated terribly because we believed Jake's lies about you. That wasn't your fault? Wasn't it? We chose to believe that our gambling-addicted son suddenly became a successful businessman and that our genuinely successful son was too selfish to help his family. We wanted to believe Jake's story because it made us feel better about ourselves. Mom nodded sadly. We were proud that Jake was taking care of us. It felt good to have him be the responsible one for once. So when I offered to help in the past and you said you were fine, we thought Jake was handling everything. We thought you knew that and were choosing not to contribute. Sarah came home from college that weekend. Her tuition was covered through the semester, but after that she'd need student loans or a different plan. I can pay for your final semester, I told her. No. Sarah, there's no reason for you to go into debt when I can easily afford it. There's every reason. I need to know that I earned my degree, not that my successful brother bought it for me. But you have earned it. You've done all the work. With financial support I didn't know I was receiving. Eddie, I spent months resenting you while you were secretly paying for my education. I need to finish this on my own terms. That same day I drove to Dorothy's studio apartment with a different proposal. Grandmother, I'd like you to come live with me. I said after we'd talked for an hour about what had really been happening with the family finances. Oh, honey, that's sweet, but I couldn't impose. It's not imposing. I have a large house, and I've been rattling around in it alone since my divorce. You'd actually be helping me. What about Jake? He said he was working on getting me into a nicer place. I took her hand gently. Grandmother, Jake is going to prison. He's been lying to all of us for years, and he's been stealing your Social Security money. Dorothy was quiet for a long time. Then I wondered why I never seemed to have enough money for groceries. Jake always said inflation was making everything expensive. Come home with me today, please. She looked around her tiny apartment at the hot plate and the secondhand furniture and the thin walls that let in noise from neighbors at all hours. All right, she said, but I pay my own way. I won't be a burden. You could never be a burden. 2 weeks later, Jake called me from jail. I almost didn't answer. Eddie, I need to talk to you. I'm listening. I have information about something that could help the family, but I need a favor first. What kind of favor? I need you to bail me out. Just temporarily. There are things I need to handle before the trial. Jake, you're facing federal charges. There's no bail for what you did. There could be if you vouched for me. Told them I wasn't a flight risk. Are you a flight risk? Silence. Jake, Eddie, there are people who are going to be very unhappy when they find out I can't pay them back. People who don't care that I'm in jail. What people? Other people I owe money to, not just Tony Marcelli's operation. My stomach dropped. How much money, Jake? It's not about the money. It's about information I have. Information that could hurt other people if it comes out in the trial. What kind of information? Eddie, just get me out of here. I'll explain everything. Tell me now. There's a woman, Crystal. She's been involved in some of my activities. If the FBI finds out about her, she could go to prison too. And she has nothing to do with the family stuff. Jake, if you've involved other people in your crimes, she's not involved in crimes, but she knows things. Things that make her dangerous to some powerful people. I closed my eyes. What things? Things about other high-stakes gambling operations. Things about people who can't afford to have their activities investigated. And you think these people might hurt her to keep her quiet? I think they might hurt anyone connected to me if they think there's a risk of exposure. Including our family? Eddie, just get me out of here, please. I hung up and immediately called Agent Morgan. We need to meet, I told her. There are complications you need to know about. What Jake hadn't told me was that Crystal was already reaching out to me herself with information that would change everything I thought I knew about the scope of his criminal activities. Crystal Martinez contacted me through a burner phone number she'd gotten from Jake's personal effects. When we met at a downtown coffee shop, she was nervous, constantly checking over her shoulder and speaking in whispers. Jake said, if anything ever happened to him, I should contact you, she said, sliding a manila envelope across the table. He said you were the only family member he trusted to handle things right. What's in the envelope? Evidence, recordings, photos, bank records, proof of things that go way beyond what Jake did to your family. I opened the envelope carefully. Inside were USB drives, printed photographs, and what appeared to be bank statements from accounts I didn't recognize. Crystal, I need you to explain what I'm looking at. She took a shaky breath. Jake wasn't just gambling. He was laundering money for other people. Big operations. The high-stakes poker games were fronts for moving dirty money through fake business accounts. And you know this how? Because I work for the State Banking Commission, Financial Compliance Investigation. I've been undercover for 8 months building a case against the entire operation. Everything clicked into place. You're law enforcement. Jake doesn't know, nobody knows except my handler and the federal task force. But when Jake got arrested, it compromised my position. The people running these operations are going to assume he'll flip and give up names to reduce his sentence. Will he? I don't think Jake understands how big this really is. He thought he was just gambling and doing small-time fraud. He has no idea he was part of a multi-million-dollar money laundering scheme. Crystal opened one of the USB drives on her laptop. Financial records filled the screen showing transfers between dozens of accounts, many with business names I recognized from Jake's fake documentation. Jake created these fake business entities for his personal fraud, but the money launderers adopted them for their own use. Pacific Holdings, Dorothy Care Services, Pacific Global Enterprises. They've been moving money through accounts Jake set up using his identity theft techniques to create additional fake businesses. So Jake accidentally became part of organized crime. Jake became a useful idiot for organized crime, and now that he's in custody, they're cleaning up loose ends. She showed me photographs of men I didn't recognize entering and leaving various businesses around Seattle. These are the people who are going to be very unhappy when they realize their money laundering network has been exposed because Jake couldn't control his gambling addiction. What do you need from me? I need you to convince Jake to cooperate fully with the federal investigation. Everything he knows, every person he's met, every transaction he's been part of. In exchange, the task force can offer him witness protection instead of maximum prison time. And if he doesn't cooperate, Crystal's expression darkened. If he doesn't cooperate, he'll probably be killed in prison within 6 months. And there's a possibility they'll go after your family members to ensure Jake's silence. I stared at the evidence spread across the coffee shop table. How did this become so complicated? Because Jake never understood the consequences of his actions. He thought he was running small cons on his family. He didn't realize he was opening doors for much larger criminal enterprises. That afternoon, I visited Jake in the federal detention center. When I explained what Crystal had told me, his face went white. Eddie, I swear I didn't know about the money laundering. I just needed accounts that looked legitimate for the poker games. Jake, these people don't care what you intended. They care that you've created a liability for their operation. What do I do? You tell the FBI everything, every name, every meeting, every transaction. You cooperate completely and hope they can protect you. What about the family? What about them? If I cooperate, these people might retaliate against mom and dad, against Sarah, against you. For the first time since this entire situation began, I heard genuine concern for others in Jake's voice. If you don't cooperate, they'll definitely retaliate, I said. The only way to protect the family is to help the FBI shut down the entire operation. Jake was quiet for a long time. Eddie, I'm sorry. For everything. For lying about the money, for turning the family against you, for putting everyone in danger. I know. Do you forgive me? I thought about that question. About 6 years of secret financial support, about Dorothy living in poverty while Jake lived in luxury, about Dad in the cardiac unit, about the fear in Mom's eyes when the loan sharks came to the house. I forgive you for being addicted to gambling, I said. I forgive you for making mistakes. But I don't forgive you for manipulating the family for years while I was trying to help everyone. I don't forgive you for stealing Dorothy's Social Security money. And I don't forgive you for putting our parents' lives in danger. Jake nodded slowly. That's fair. But I'll help you get through this if you do the right thing now. What's the right thing? Tell the truth, all of it. For once in your life, just tell the complete truth. Jake did cooperate with the FBI investigation. His testimony helped bring down a money laundering operation that had been moving over $50 million annually through fake businesses and gambling fronts. 12 people were arrested, including the loan shark operation that had threatened our family. But Jake's cooperation came with a price. He received a reduced sentence of 3 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. He would have to testify in multiple trials and remain in protective custody for his own safety. The day of Jake's sentencing, our entire family was in the courtroom. Mom cried throughout the proceedings. Dad sat stoically, his face showing no emotion. Sarah held my hand, and Dorothy squeezed my other hand when the judge announced the sentence. When it was over, we were allowed a brief meeting with Jake before he was transferred to a federal facility in another state. "Take care of them," he said to me. "Take care of the family. They're not your responsibility anymore, Jake, and they're not mine either. They're adults who can take care of themselves. But if they need help, they'll ask for it honestly, and I'll decide whether to provide it based on what's best for everyone involved, not based on guilt or manipulation." Mom hugged Jake goodbye, whispering something I couldn't hear. Dad shook his hand formally like a business acquaintance. Sarah said nothing, but tears ran down her cheeks. As we left the courthouse, I realized that my family would never be the same. But maybe that wasn't entirely a bad thing. 2 years have passed since Jake began serving his federal sentence. The changes in my family have been both painful and profound, but ultimately necessary for everyone's growth and healing. Dorothy thrived in my home from the moment she moved in. At 86, she turned out to be sharper, funnier, and more resilient than any of us had realized. The confusion Jake had described was actually the result of malnutrition and social isolation, not dementia. Within 3 months of proper food and daily conversation, she was beating me at chess and offering unsolicited advice about my love life. "You know, Eddie," she told me one evening as we sat on my back deck overlooking Lake Washington, "I always wondered why you stopped visiting. Jake said you were too busy with work, but it didn't sound like the boy I'd helped raise. Why didn't you call me directly? Jake said you'd asked him to handle all family communication because you found my calls too depressing." She laughed bitterly. "I spent 2 years thinking I was a burden to my own grandson." Dorothy became my closest confidant during the difficult process of rebuilding relationships with my parents and Sarah. She was also the one who convinced me to start dating again after my divorce, arguing that I couldn't spend my whole life trying to fix other people's problems. "Love isn't about rescuing people," she told me. "It's about finding someone who doesn't need rescuing." I took her advice and began dating Rachel, a veterinarian I met when I adopted a rescue dog named Murphy. Rachel knew nothing about my family's financial situation, my tech success, or the complicated history with Jake. She liked me for who I was, not for what I could provide. And that felt revolutionary after years of being valued primarily for my ability to solve other people's problems. My relationship with my parents remained complicated but gradually improved. They were too proud to accept direct financial help, but they allowed me to hire them as consultants for a charitable foundation I established to help families affected by gambling addiction. Dad's factory experience and Mom's bookkeeping skills made them genuinely valuable contributors to the foundation's operations. Working together on the foundation gave us a way to rebuild our relationship around shared goals rather than financial dependency. Slowly, we began to trust each other again. Dad admitted that he'd always suspected Jake's business success stories didn't add up, but he'd wanted to believe them so badly that he'd ignored obvious inconsistencies. I needed Jake to be successful, he told me during one of our foundation meetings. I needed to believe that something good had come from all his struggles with addiction and unemployment. When you seemed uninterested in helping the family, it was easier to believe you were selfish than to admit Jake was still lying. Mom's healing process was more difficult. She'd built her identity around being Jake's protector and advocate, and accepting that he'd systematically lied to and stolen from the family required her to completely reassess her role as a mother. "I enabled him," she said during one of our monthly dinners. "Every excuse I made every time I convinced your father to give him another chance, every time I blamed his problems on his addiction instead of his choices. I enabled him to hurt all of you." "You loved him?" I replied. "That's not the same as enabling him. Isn't it if I'd insisted on accountability years ago? Maybe he never would have escalated to stealing Dorothy's Social Security money or forging your father's signature on loan documents." Mom started attending Al-Anon meetings for families of addicts and slowly began to understand the difference between supporting someone's recovery and enabling their destructive behavior. It was painful to watch her work through years of guilt and self-blame, but necessary for her own mental health. Sarah's journey was perhaps the most inspiring. She took out student loans to finish her final semester of college, worked 2 part-time jobs to cover living expenses, and graduated with honors despite the emotional upheaval of Jake's arrest and trial. She refused my offers of financial help throughout the process, determined to prove to herself that she could succeed independently. "I need to know that my accomplishments are mine," she explained when I offered to pay off her student loans after graduation. "For too long I thought I was succeeding because of Jake's support. Now I need to succeed because of my own efforts." Sarah got a job with a nonprofit organization that provides financial literacy education to low-income families. Her experience with our family's situation made her passionate about helping others recognize and escape financial manipulation. She was the first family member to visit Jake in prison. When she returned from that visit, she was quiet for several days before finally talking to me about it. "He's different," she said. "Calmer, more honest. Prison has been hard, but he's finally taking responsibility for what he did." "Do you think he's genuinely changed?" "I think he's genuinely trying to change. Whether that lasts when he gets out, we'll see." Jake and I exchanged letters occasionally. His were different from any communication I'd ever received from him. Honest about his mistakes, realistic about the damage he'd caused, and focused on making amends rather than asking for favors. He'd completed addiction treatment programs in prison and was working with a counselor to understand the psychological patterns that had led to his criminal behavior. In one letter he wrote, "I realize now that I was addicted to more than gambling. I was addicted to the feeling of being important, of being needed, of being seen as successful. Taking credit for your generosity wasn't just about money, it was about finally feeling like I mattered to the family." He also wrote about his plans for after his release. "I know I can't just come back and expect to pick up where I left off with the family. I've lost the right to expect anything from any of you. But I hope that someday, if I can prove that I've genuinely changed, there might be a place for me in your lives again." I wasn't ready to make any promises about the future, but I was encouraged by the self-awareness his letters demonstrated. The foundation Dorothy, Rachel, and I established has become my primary focus outside of work. We provide emergency financial assistance to families dealing with gambling addiction, but we also offer education about financial manipulation tactics and healthy family boundaries. Many of the families we help have stories similar to ours. One family member's addiction or mental health issues creating chaos that affects everyone else's stability and well-being. Through this work, I've learned that my family's story isn't unique. Across the country, there are countless families struggling with the balance between supporting loved ones and enabling destructive behavior. There are siblings like me who sacrifice their own needs to fix other people's problems. There are parents like mine who desperately want to believe their troubled children have turned their lives around. There are grandparents like Dorothy who suffer in silence, while their families focus on more dramatic crises. Most importantly, I've learned that loving someone doesn't mean protecting them from the consequences of their actions. Real love sometimes requires allowing people to fail to face accountability and to do the hard work of changing themselves rather than expecting others to constantly rescue them. My relationship with Rachel has taught me what healthy love looks like. She supports my desire to help my family, but she doesn't define herself by her ability to fix my problems. When I told her about Jake's situation and my complicated feelings about his eventual release from prison, she listened without judgment, but also without trying to tell me what I should do. It's your family and your decision, she said. But whatever you decide, make sure you're choosing what's best for you, not just what feels comfortable or familiar. That advice has guided many of my choices over the past 2 years. When my parents suggested that Jake should come live with them after his release to help with his transition back to society, I supported their right to make that choice while making it clear that I wouldn't provide financial support for Jake's housing or expenses. When Sarah asked if I thought she should include Jake in her upcoming wedding, I told her that her wedding should include people who make her feel loved and supported, and that she shouldn't feel obligated to include someone based solely on blood relationship. These conversations have been difficult, but they've also been liberating. For the first time in my adult life, I'm not responsible for managing other people's emotions or solving their problems. I can offer support and advice when asked, but I don't have to rescue anyone or protect them from their own choices. Dorothy often reminds me that this was always an option. You chose to carry everyone's burdens, Eddie, she told me recently. Nobody forced you to do that. Jake took advantage of your generosity, but you also allowed him to do it for years because it felt good to be needed. She was right. Part of my identity had been built around being the successful brother who could solve everyone's problems. Jake's betrayal had hurt not just because he'd lied and stolen, but because it had forced me to confront my own need to be seen as the family savior. Learning to love my family without trying to fix them has been one of the hardest lessons of my life, but also one of the most important. I can be there for them without being responsible for their happiness. I can offer help without taking ownership of their problems. I can maintain boundaries while still maintaining relationships. As I write this, Jake has 18 months left on his sentence. My parents are financially stable again, living within their means and rebuilding their credit. Sarah is engaged to a wonderful man who knows our family's complete history and loves her anyway. Dorothy is teaching Rachel how to make her famous apple pie and giving unsolicited relationship advice to anyone who'll listen. I've learned that family isn't just about blood relationships or shared history. Real family consists of people who choose to love and support each other honestly, without manipulation or hidden agendas. Some of my biological family members qualify for that definition, and some don't. That's okay. The foundation has helped over 200 families in the past 2 years, and the work has given me a sense of purpose that goes beyond personal success or wealth accumulation. Every family we help reminds me that healing is possible, that people can change, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's destructive behavior. When people ask me if I regret the way I handled Jake's situation, my answer is always the same. I regret the secrecy and deception that allowed the situation to develop in the first place. I regret not being honest with my family about my financial success and my desire to help them. I regret creating a system that allowed Jake to take credit for my generosity while positioning himself as the family's savior. But I don't regret exposing his fraud, and I don't regret allowing him to face the consequences of his actions. Those consequences may have saved his life by forcing him to confront his addictions and criminal behavior. They certainly saved my family from years of continued manipulation and financial abuse. The most important lesson I've learned is this: you can't love someone into changing. You can't sacrifice enough, give enough money, or make enough excuses to transform someone who isn't ready to transform themselves. The most loving thing you can do for someone engaged in destructive behavior is to stop enabling them and start requiring accountability. Love without boundaries isn't love, it's codependency. Support without honesty isn't support, it's enabling. Family loyalty that requires you to ignore harmful behavior isn't loyalty, it's complicity. Real love, real support, and real loyalty sometimes require difficult choices. They require saying no when someone asks you to participate in their dysfunction. They require walking away when someone refuses to take responsibility for their actions. They require choosing your own mental health and well-being over other people's comfort with familiar patterns of dysfunction. These aren't easy lessons to learn, and they're even harder to practice. But they're essential for anyone who wants to build genuine, healthy relationships instead of partnerships based on manipulation, guilt, and unspoken obligation. My family story could have ended differently. If I'd continued to enable Jake's behavior, if I'd chosen to pay off his debts without exposing his fraud, if I'd prioritized temporary peace over long-term accountability, we might have maintained the illusion of family harmony for a few more years. But eventually, Jake's criminal behavior would have escalated. The loan sharks would have become more dangerous. More family members would have been hurt, and all of us would have remained trapped in a dysfunctional system that benefited no one except Jake's addiction. Instead, by choosing truth over comfort, accountability over enablement, and healthy boundaries over false peace, we gave everyone in our family the opportunity to grow, heal, and build genuinely healthy relationships. That opportunity wasn't free. It cost us years of painful conversations, difficult realizations about ourselves and each other, and the hard work of rebuilding trust from scratch. But it was worth every difficult moment because it gave us the chance to love each other honestly for the first time in years. If you're dealing with a family member whose behavior is harmful to themselves and others, I want you to know that you have permission to protect yourself. You have permission to say no. You have permission to stop solving other people's problems and start focusing on your own well-being. You have permission to love someone from a distance if that's what's necessary for your mental health. Most importantly, you have permission to believe that you deserve relationships based on mutual respect, honesty, and genuine care, rather than manipulation, guilt, and obligation. Setting boundaries with family members who engage in destructive behavior isn't cruel, it's necessary. It's necessary for your own well-being, and it's often necessary to create the space that person needs to recognize the need for change. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop protecting them from the consequences of their choices. Sometimes walking away creates the opportunity for real healing to begin. And sometimes, as painful as it is to admit, the family you choose is healthier and more loving than the family you were born into. That's not a failure of blood relationships. It's a recognition that love is a choice, and healthy love requires mutual respect, honesty, and accountability from everyone involved. The people in your life who truly love you will respect your boundaries, support your well-being, and take responsibility for their own actions. The people who respond to your boundaries with anger, guilt, or manipulation are telling you everything you need to know about the true nature of your relationship with them. Listen to what their actions tell you, not what their words promise you. Trust your instincts about what feels healthy and what feels destructive. And remember that you can't love someone into changing, but you can love yourself enough to stop participating in their dysfunction. That's the hardest and most important lesson I've learned from my family's journey through financial fraud addiction and the slow process of rebuilding trust and healthy relationships. I hope it helps you navigate your own journey toward healthier, more honest relationships with the people you love. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members to protect your own well-being? How did you navigate the balance between love and accountability in those relationships? I'd love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and consider sharing it with someone who might benefit from hearing about the importance of healthy boundaries in family relationships. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about overcoming family challenges and building stronger, more honest relationships. Thank you for listening. And remember that you deserve relationships built on genuine love, respect, and mutual support. Don't settle for anything less.